watching LYNC Interview. I'm Jessica Eturralde. Today's guest is Dr. Brian Grimm, founder of the Religious Freedom and Business Foundation and one of the world's leading voices on the intersection of faith, policy, and business. In this episode, we will explore how his experiences led him to start the foundation, why appealing to self-interest can be more effective than moral arguments alone, and how cross-cultural religious literacy and the business sector can work together to promote religious freedom, especially in restrictive environments. But first, this brief message. Before we get started, here's a little reminder that we depend on viewers like you to spread the word. So if you enjoy this program, please like and subscribe and share this program with someone you know. As mentioned before the break, Dr. Brian Grimm is the founder and president of the Religious Freedom and Business Foundation and a leading global expert on religious freedom and inclusion. He holds a PhD in sociology and previously served as a senior researcher at the Pew Research Center, where he co-led groundbreaking studies on global religious restrictions. Dr. Grimm has worked extensively in China, the former Soviet Union, and the Middle East, giving him a deep understanding of how religion intersects with culture and policy. Today, he helps businesses and governments see how religious freedom and faith-friendly workplaces can foster peace, innovation, and economic growth. Welcome, Dr. Grimm.
Wonderful to be with you, Jessica.
Doctor, to start, your background is incredibly rich. You've helped develop global religious freedom indexes at Pew and spent key years in Kazakhstan during its post-Soviet transition, as well as time living in Xinjiang and the Emirates. How have these diverse experiences shaped your vision and contributed to your decision to found the Religious Freedom and Business Foundation?
Well, those experiences living overseas in areas that were restrictive in terms of religious freedom really guided a lot of the work that I'm doing today, especially in China, where government restrictions on religion are very high, and then living in the Soviet Union during the Soviet periods where there were high government restrictions. Those two sort of form the narrative of how people think of how religious freedom is inhibited or prevented. But living in the Middle East and in the Emirates and Saudi Arabia, I saw a different side. There were, of course, government restrictions, but there was a large social acceptance, endorsement of participation in Islam. And it came from people all over the world. So in the Emirates, especially, you have Muslims from all around the world. And it struck me just at one Ramadan, at the end of Ramadan, this was in 2002, the year right after 9/11. Ramadan happened, and I saw thousands and thousands of people moving below my balcony where I was living, and they were heading to this field that was just used for big occasions as a mosque, an open air mosque. And it was men and boys. I saw one or two women, and this was as they were breaking the fast. So and this was daylight. So as they were moving there to pray, the women were back home, mostly preparing the feast to break the fast. And these were people from all over the world. And then I realized just how powerful what I call the social regulation of religion is. Nobody dictated that they had to behave in this way. It was just a huge social movement. And then as I saw sort of where restrictions on religion come within Muslim majority countries, it wasn't just the government, but people themselves had attitudes and beliefs such as, that blasphemy should be punished severely. Conversion is like treason. And these types of social attitudes also restricted people's ability to decide, well, maybe I want to look at something else. So those experiences of living in former communist countries, China and the Soviet Union, where I saw government restrictions, but then in the Middle East, seeing how much society itself could present barriers for somebody within those societies wanting to choose a different path. That's what led me to the research at Pew. And then that research, once you measure something and count it up and codify it, you can see how it relates to other things, such as economies. And that's what I saw. And I can share some more, but that foundation and those measures you mentioned that I created was really the first time to look at religious freedom as something more than just what a government law does, but also what policies and behaviors of politicians and also groups in society, how they restrict religious freedom.
Hmm. Listening to you, it sounds like there is a real organic element to religious freedom and just being able to foster religious freedom. And as I understand it, sometimes it's a temptation to just nationally want to persuade governments and people to support religious freedom, but sometimes appealing to self-interest, some argue might be a better way. Could
Yeah.
you weigh in why appealing to self-interest might be a more effective strategy for advancing religious freedom than simply trying to persuade governments and individuals to support it because it's the good thing to do?
Yeah. Well, I can give it an example from my own work life, which many people in the workplace experience. So, I'll just compare my work life in two Muslim majority countries. One was the United Arab Emirates, where there was relative freedom of religion. Well, I'm Catholic, and we could have a Catholic church, and we could baptize and teach and train and have churches and have a full program of religious activity. However, in Saudi Arabia, any Catholicism, Christianity, anything other than state-approved Islam was illegal. You couldn't even practice it in those years we were there. In Saudi Arabia, I had no motivation to work. I just counted, literally, I had a card where I counted every half part of a day that I finished work till I would finish my contract and could leave, because it was just, I had no religious freedom at all. Whereas in the UAE, I had relative religious freedom and I was motivated to work. In fact, I wrote a book of poetry that was used as part of a textbook for first year students across the country. And, that kind of going above and beyond where I had religious freedom, I felt motivated to work and to do my best. And in the other place, I just wanted to finish the contract. So that, just from my personal experience, and for many people of faith, if they go into a workplace that is, it says check your religion at the door. We just want you here to work and do your job, and what you believe and what matters to you doesn't matter to us. Well, that's demotivating for people, and for many people, that their faith is what inspires them to live, to work in the first place, to care and to innovate. So that's at a micro level. So when you look at any business, companies that open that door, that people can bring they say their whole self, but even their whole soul to work, have a much stronger workforce. So that's at a you could say micro level, company level, workplace level. But then for economies, it's the same, where you open that space that I can use an example from the US. So you've probably stayed in a Marriott hotel at some point. And most people, or at least have seen a Marriott, if not stayed in one. And there's many brands of Marriott today. Well, the founders of the Marriotts were Mormons, members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And at one time in U.S. history, there was a war on against the Latter-day Saints. And even one governor issued an extermination order that all Mormons should leave the state or be exterminated. And so if we had continued to not accept a religious minority in the country, we would have never seen perhaps the most successful hotel chain in the world develop, and giving jobs, and not just jobs, but ways for us to, go to a new city, do business, go on tour, tourism, all of these things that that business itself provide. So if you don't have a religiously open environment where you're accepting of people who are different than your own faith, you may be, pushing out the next big innovation, such as the Marriotts and how they were able to create such a beneficial company that benefits not only our country but the world.
I see. Thank you for that. Listening to what you have to say on the micro level and a larger level, I'm interpreting a lot of economic self-interest. Is that one of the highest motivators of self-interest?
I think that if you look at the U.S. situation right now, uh, sort of the higher ideals, are giving way to self-interest. So, in the current administration, tariffs and America first and all of this, it's a language that, it's a language that is being used and is being forcefully used, and people respond to that. So whether that's good or bad, I have my own personal opinions on that, but that self-interest is something that gets people's attention, and then, they respond to that. So if a government can see that having a religiously free society is good for the economy, that gives them some reason other than pure ideals, or sort of adhering to human rights or norms. It gives them real reasons to promote religious freedom. So I think, I wouldn't say that that's where most people begin, but at the bottom line, when you're having to make decisions, it's going, people make a decision based on, well, what's best for me, what's best for my company, what's best for my country, or at least, that's high on the list of priorities. So I think it is a very important argument. That's not the only argument to be made, but it's one that is unique. Very few religious freedom advocates work in that space. Many work on laws and policies, trying to influence governments and government action, but very few are using economic arguments, which actually make this right more tangible, more concrete, to people for whom religion doesn't matter. For many people, they're, as a famous sociologist once said, they're religiously tone deaf. They may not, hear the notes of religion and why it has any value and why should we give it religious freedom. But when you turn it into economic sense, then that makes sense to them.
That's an interesting concept because often I talk to people who speak on the interest of security. And I think, would I be correct to interpret that this could be an opportunity, a tool to reconsider if they think something's going well, or maybe it's not broken enough to fix it, that this considering this self-interest might be something that would cause them to pause and maybe think about this in a way that they haven't thought before?
I think even if you take the concept of security, and so part of my research shows that where you have lower restrictions on religion coming from both governments and groups in society, you have less violent persecution, less religious conflict. So, the data are very clear that religious freedom, when protected and respected, results in more peaceful societies. And that's a very strong argument. That's good for security. It creates environments where economies are better, and therefore the fuel that provides fuel to terrorist organizations, for example, is pulled back because you have jobs. So one example is in northern Iraq. This is going back some years, but in northern Iraq, there was a survey done of the population after the fall of Saddam Hussein and before ISIS came in, and we had the battle with ISIS taking over the northern part of Iraq. There was a survey done, and people asked, "What are your biggest concerns?" And Was it security? No. Was it terrorism? No. Was it, these types of questions? No. It was having a job. That was the biggest concern people had. And so you had a situation where there were no jobs, and then ISIS was able to come in and say, well, we have a better way. Look, you're living in uh, poverty. There's no hope for you. We'll give you the hope. So I think that, combining these narratives that religious freedom promotes an open and innovative economy and involves everyone, where ideas can come from any sector, that also is a security argument, because then people are involved, they belong. So it's just like my workplace example, where I feel like I don't belong. I'm looking for a way to get out of that workplace. The same in an economy. If people feel like they belong and they're able to contribute, then they're motivated to work and find their way forward and develop. So I think, I wouldn't say it's either or this is better than a security argument. I think these arguments all go together.
In the space of religious freedom, particularly for builders, the subject of cross-cultural religious literacy comes up a lot. And just given your expertise and your focus on the business portion of that, how do you view the intersection of cross-cultural religious literacy at the business sector in advancing religious freedom?
Well, two ways that I think about it is, first, in any business, if I'm going to go work in a culture that's different than mine, with different religion as the majority religion, if I don't understand anything about that religion, I'm really at a handicap being able to do business in that place. So if I, worked in the Muslim world for many years, if I don't understand Islam, and at least, be able to converse and understand my own faith and feel confident in that, as well as understand other people's faith and respect that and have engage with them productively, it's very hard to do business in such a place. So whether it's a Muslim majority country, a Hindu majority country like India, if you don't understand the sensitivities and the culture, the norms, and how people think about meaning in the universe, your business arguments may fall flat, and you may not be able to work with your coworkers. So I think from a cross-cultural religious literacy perspective, it's really important to be able to understand the workplace, the culture, the society that you're working in. But then on a second category, where business has an ability to promote this, is one, in their own workplaces, by making them religiously open, faith-friendly, have employee groups for different faiths that engage with one another. And this is a common practice in many of the best businesses. But also, what can a company do to promote this in their societies? So one training that we have is, we have a curriculum that teaches 10 different human rights, and then we have a soft business skill that accompanies that. So, for example, freedom of expression, and then we have a soft business skill is, how to make a business pitch. So, and how to express yourself coherently. So then you can say, well, freedom of expression is good, but you need to be able to make a good argument while you're doing that. And so then we can couple both a human right that has religious dimensions to it, because freedom of speech includes being able to share about what your beliefs are, and then coupling that with a business skill. So I think business could have some very unique ways that they could support this. And so many companies have what's called CSR, corporate social responsibility initiatives, or funds that they do for underserved communities, or for development type activities, or aid or charity work. And one of the things that companies could do is support this curriculum with their CSR funds. And in India, companies are required by law to spend 2% of their profits on after several years on CSR projects. So I think there's some openings that when we think of CSR, that it shouldn't be just, dialogues between people that like to do interfaith work, if I can put it that way. That's a very limited crowd. But if you can expand that space where you're talking about values and that touch on religious values and religious human rights that give religious associated with religious freedom, and you tie that with practical skills, it gives a reason for people to want to explore this further. And in schools, when we go to schools and say, would you like a curriculum on human rights or that include religious freedom and, dialogue around these topics? It's like, well, I'm not sure. Oh, but it has business skills. And it's like, whoa, that's interesting. So I think that looking at the connection where some of these kinds of conversations that, cross-cultural religious literacy is aiming to promote, but how that can have a practical side of what are some good outcomes for somebody's, career or employability, then gives reason to do that kind of dialogue.
I'm connecting the dots to a few things you said earlier when you were speaking about your experience in the UAE and how society was just the ripple effects, being motivated to produce more fruit in their work. And that's what I think about when you're talking about this internal focus of businesses
Yeah,
in their environments and creating a somewhat a cohesion within that environment. And
right.
then again, in your second example, I had the privilege to interview Dr. Ava Weitzman last December from the Marriott School of Business.
Yeah,
And she brought up a point that supports exactly what you're saying. First of all, the concept that businesses have a lot more to contribute to their communities, to society, than just finances. And then additionally, in the circumstance of, let's say, a more restrictive environment or even conflict zones, that it seems to be a natural tendency that we gather. Hopefully, we can bring to the table governments, we can bring together religious leaders, we can bring together civil society. But sometimes there may be a blind spot to inviting businesses to come to that conversation. So I would
right.
love to hear your thoughts on that. And maybe if you could also share some ways that businesses have successfully promoted religious freedom, especially in countries with complex or restrictive environments.
Yeah. So I think one is when you have there's a difference between a global corporation and a local enterprise. So if you're thinking of global corporations and what they may be able to bring, you're not going to find many global corporations that are going to take a stand on some political issue in a country that may get them um, banned or, thrown out of the country. So for global corporations, what they can do inside of a company, inside of a more restrictive country, is focus on their own workplace and make that workplace open. So one of the global companies I work with has official employee groups for different faiths. And the leader of the Christian group of this company, um, they have a lot of employees in China, and a number of them wanted to join the Christian group. And they took it to their chief legal officer and said, well, can we let them join, realizing the restricted nature of China? And the corporation said, yes. If we're going to have this workplace culture, we're not going to change our workplace culture when we work in China or some other country where it might be more restrictive when it comes to religious freedom. So they allowed that. So that's that's one example of a workplace. Even the U.S. State Department under the last administration invited me to give training to all the mission posts in China on creating a religiously inclusive, religiously free, faith-friendly workplace for the U.S. embassies and their missions and consulates around the country. So it may be, it might not be that they can go out and preach this on the sidewalks of China, so to speak, but they can impact because they employ many local people. So that's one way, creating that environment um, in the workplaces where they are. Uh, Others are just thinking of doing business. So it's a small business, but in northern Iraq that I've already mentioned, part of the ISIS um, attack was the genocide of people they considered heretics, like the Yazidis and certain of the Christian communities. So there's a foundation, the Free Yazidi Foundation, has come back and they're building businesses for Yazidis so that Yazidi women in particular can have employment. So it's an initiative that's small scale, but it's also creating resiliency and a way for those communities not only to support themselves, but also to thrive.
Yes, I appreciate you touching on an example that shows us how businesses can contribute more to their local environments in a deep level that has uh, a lot of effect in a community. I think this is a good time to ask, coming off what you said, for example, with all of the dissonance going on in the world in a time of great uncertainty, can you share a hopeful example from your work? Something that gives you reason to believe progress is possible.
Well, I think one of the challenges in this work is to get the stories out. I mean, we're doing an interview today that hopefully will help inform people, right? That's where we're at. And a lot of the major media doesn't adequately cover issues of faith when it comes to how faith contributes to the economy, for religious freedom, opens the space. Um, and in the last week, I was approached by a top reporter from Bloomberg News who used to be at the Wall Street Journal and New York Times, and was doing a story on faith-based initiatives inside major corporations. And she found the foundation, and then I told her that, well, we actually have a conference coming up and that we bring together for people working in Fortune 500 companies where they share about what they're doing to make their workplaces religiously inclusive and how faith contributes to their companies. And she said, "Wow, could I come?" And I said, "Well, we'd love to have you. With sort of rules. One, you can't quote people unless you get their permission because they're speaking in a personal capacity, not necessarily on the on behalf of their companies." And she said that would be fine. So there we have a major business news source seeing this as a business story, and I think that's for me that's encouraging because a lot of times when we work on religious freedom issues, even when I'm working on religious freedom in business, the business side of the news doesn't pay attention as much as sort of the religion reporters may pick this up, but not a hardcore business reporter. So here, that's for me, that was very encouraging to see that now there's some interest from a business reporter, not a religion reporter, business reporter who wants to drill into this and learn more and share more. So that that's a sign of hope in these days.
Yeah, that is quite encouraging. And of course, this interview would be amiss if we do not take a moment to talk about the upcoming Dare to Overcome event, the sixth annual Fortune 500 Faith at Work conference happening May 20th through 22nd at Catholic University's Bush School of Business in DC. I did notice that you've got some incredible sponsors lined up. Dell, Merck, Coca-Cola Consolidated, and you also have a full program with keynotes, networking, and tracks on building inclusive, faith-friendly workplaces. And I also know there's an international dinner and even the option to transition into the IRF Builders Forum, which you are co-convening with the IRF Secretariat and Love Your Neighbor community. LYNC is very fortunate to be able to join you all with that. Can you tell our listeners a bit more about the vision behind Dare to Overcome this year and what makes it such a unique gathering?
Well, it's unique in that it's the only conference of its sort, gathering of people to share what's going on inside some of the world's biggest and best companies when it comes to faith-based initiatives. And so that in itself is really interesting that you have people from we'll have people from American Airlines, Accenture, Dell Technologies, Coca-Cola, companies that you've mentioned, and more that are coming and talking about the progress they're making in helping their companies embrace workplace religious freedom in the context of making their workplaces open to people of faith. So I think one of the messages of the conference is that by expanding that space where faith is welcome, where you don't have to hide that that you're like me, a Catholic, or you're a Muslim, or you're Jewish, or you're an atheist, that you don't have to hide, or that you're a seeker. You don't have to hide that and keep it under the table. That makes for a more trusting and engaging workplace that builds better teams and more success. So I think that is the message. That's a message that is needed in America right now, where we've got such a polarized environment, and the rhetoric often revolves around certain religious rhetoric that can put some people off, and other people feel at home, and others are left out. So that isn't good for business. If you have a workplace where half the people feel like they don't belong, that's a failed workplace. So I think that's the unique aspect of it, and that to help people see wherever they are in the world, if they can help their workplace be open, that it's okay to ask a woman who has a scarf on, "Oh, why do you wear a hijab? That's interesting. And it's, by the way, looks very nice." To be curious, to provide these opportunities to build religious freedom by just making religion okay, not making it a weird, you know, it might sound like a strange thing, but, in many workplaces, people are so afraid to mention something about religion because either they're not confident themselves, or they're afraid of offending someone else, or they just think separation of church and state applies to everything, that you can't bring up religion. So that's what the conference helps people and companies see, and hopefully it can help the current administration, politicians, as well as people in society and religious leaders say that this is a real viable way to build religious freedom uh, for for anybody in any workplace around the world.
Making religion okay. I like that. Fostering an environment where one can be curious about religion. Looking forward to that event. And of course, we'll include a link to that information in our show notes. So I want to wrap up our interview, and I typically do by asking if there's a question you were expecting or hoping I would ask that I haven't, or is there anything important you'd like to share that we haven't touched on yet?
So a question that I think is worth asking is, what's the eternal purpose of having religious freedom? And for many people in workplaces, they're working day after day towards some project or some goal. Whether you're in a workplace, or you're, running a family, and getting kids somewhere, we're just run by what's next. But when certain events happen, like right now, as we're being interviewed, we're having tremendous disruption in the economies, and people are like taken back. And if you don't have that space that people can talk about, well, what's really important in life? It's not just this job, it's not just the stock market. And that's where religious freedom opens the space for true human connection that can look beyond today, tomorrow's problems, but also can open that space that we can think about eternity, and what these small things we're doing right now might fit into an eternal picture. So you didn't ask that question, but I think thinking of the eternal benefits of religious freedom, and as they apply to a human soul, is a worthwhile question to think about.
Eternal benefits and human connection. Thank you, Dr. Grimm. That's all for this episode of LYNC Interview. A special thanks to Dr. Brian Grimm for joining us today. Doctor, if our followers would like to learn more about your work or the Religious Freedom and Business Foundation, where should they go?
Well, the place I'm most active is LinkedIn. So if you're on LinkedIn, just reach out, connect to me, and I'll link in there. And we post things regularly. Of course, our website, you can find faithandbusiness.org, faithandbusiness.org, and you can find out more there as well.
Thank you, Dr. Grimm. I'm Jessica Eturralde, and you've been watching LYNC Interview. For more information on religious freedom building, including reports, stories, and case studies, visit lyncommunity.org. Additionally, if you found today's program valuable, please like, subscribe, and share this program on your social media. Also, did you know that this show is now available as a podcast? You can find this show along with our radio program, LYNC Radio, on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Thanks for tuning in.